Morning, and I'm very sorry not to be able to be there with you today, but I hope that we can have a good conversation, even though we're a little bit far away from each other. But so my talk today is about the folk and scientific taxonomies of pollinators, and if they do go in hand in hand. Um, Naming and ordering things in life is just part of our human nature. We need to name things and organize them so we can make sense of the world around us. And this is something that we do every single day with things, with nature, and with people. And this book that is in the screen on the upper right, basically on the right side, basically show you different examples of this process that we do every single day. So folk taxonomies are just basically the regular day-to-day classification that are naming things that we do in our lives, which is the goal um, in the biological classifications. And as Jesse mentioned, and I am a taxonomist, B taxonomist, and I do this as part of my job too. So in this table, I wanted to compare the folk taxonomy and the scientific taxonomy, different aspects of it. The first thing is that they're both have the same goals, right? The same goal of naming and classifying things. However, there are differences in different aspects regarding the use. The folk taxonomies are usually restricted in their use, a local use, um, while the scientific taxonomy seeks a global use of this knowledge system. When we look at the dependence of the each taxonomy in terms of the context, well, the false taxonomy depends on the culture and also on the environment. Each culture may name things differently and the things that they have around. In terms of the scientific taxonomy, it doesn't depend on those things. We classify things and we name things based on their evolutionary relationships. Um, what you might expect, the fall taxonomies are very flexible because one name can be used to name multiple things. And it also varies among cultures. This is not the case for scientific taxonomy that seeks to have a more rigid and universal system in which one name can be applied to the same kind of thing. So we can facilitate the communication. However, fall taxonomies have a much broader context to name things. They depend, or we use these different aspects of it. We use behavior, ecology, morphology, uses, smell of the things to be able to classify them. While these concepts are a little bit narrower in the case of the scientific taxonomy, usually is based on morphology or based on these relationships. Now we're using DNA to classify things. Um, Another aspect of both scientific and folk taxonomy is that folk taxonomies are largely undocumented, and they are at risk of being lost. As cultures are transforming, all this knowledge has been accumulated for many years, it's at a risk of getting lost. This is not the case for scientific taxonomies that are better documented. Now with more system, we can maintain this information for longer time. So when I started to learn about plants and animals, I always heard that the classification and the naming things for birds was very, very similar to the scientific taxonomy. And this is one example in Indonesia, in which locally the scientists recognized 88 species, and the local people are able to recognize and classify 79 of them. And these are using basically binomial names in some cases, so names that give a general feature and then a qualifier to the second name. And most of these are, as you see in this table on the bottom, using different kinds of lines of information. So they classify birds based on the on the vocalization, the type of sound that they make, in the type of color, the nest, some rare behavior, some the size, different kind of things that they're using to classify them. Um, in another extreme, we have, or in another case, we have frogs, and this is another example from South Africa. Here in this case, we have 58 species of frogs that were um, named based on or using 6 names only, and these are uninomial names. So basically, a single name. And here you see in these two column tables, the column on the left are the species with all the scientific classification, the family in the middle, and then the indigenous names that are used. And as you may have noticed already, one name can be applied to multiple genera, multiple families, but in general, these 6 names try to make larger groups, right? Um, but we live in a world that is, at least in the number of species, dominated by insects. And this illustration here show you that most of the diversity of animals in our world is basically insects. And among those insects, the most important of those is bees. And this is not because Jesse and I study bees. It's because it has been, because of the role of bees in the pollination and our food security. But we have about 20,000 species of bees that vary significantly in their color, body size, smell, and also in their behavior. So some species are nesting in the ground. Some of these are using snails, different kind of those. And given the role of bees in pollination, I wonder how people are understanding this bee diversity. So about 5 years ago, um, I conducted a work in the southern part of Mexico with a group of people who happened to be um, using a language that was very common in pre-Columbian times, but nowadays it's only spoken by around 5,000 people. These are the Mystic in southern Mexico. And in collaboration with the anthropologists and linguists who have been studying this language for decades, we went to this place and we worked with 7 consultants who were um, fluent in Mixtec and Spanish. So my original language is Spanish. I'm from Colombia. So it was easier to communicate with them. And we use basically 2 methods, like semi-structured interviews and also a method that is called walking the woods. That basically they lead expeditions into the wild, and any bee that we encounter or nests, we started to ask questions with them about the names, the uses that they have to these bees, and how they recognize them. And simultaneously, I was doing some surveys there of the local fauna to understand how they're classifying all these group of bees there. So this is what we found, which is very interesting, is that out of the 200 bees that are locally occurring in the area, they recognized one group of bees that make honey. On the other side, we have carpenter bees. There are 3 species, but they give just a genetic name for those. And then the rest of bees that are grouped even with wasps and other flies, including this category. But the honey makers, they recognize 90 species, which are very similar to the 90 species that I, as a taxonomist, was able to recognize. And they use binomial names to recognize them. And this is based on different kind of features. The behavior in terms of the type of nest, morphology, the size, the color, some of the sensorial cues, for instance, using this type of smell. They will grab them from their nest, smell them, and they will recognize the kind of bee based on that, the taste of the honey, and also the habitat, whether they're nesting in the ground or up in the trees. So it's very interesting to see the different kinds of features that they're using to identify them. These are some examples. So we have this species, they call it Ñuño Piló, which literally means honey vulture because the American vulture has a similar color. In particular, the tip of the wings are white. So they have they use the name for that. Um, this one is interesting. They call it Ñuñulisa to this species because the entrance of the nest. So this is the entrance of the nest. Is long, and it has the same color as a corn cob. And even some of the nest structures, internal nest structures, they use words that we now use, as, for instance, like tortilla, um, for the combs of the bees inside the nest. So very, very interesting. And if you remember, corn, for instance, was domesticated in Central America. Um, Another interesting case for this is that they named this big honeybee. No, sorry, they call it honey big bee, um, for one species that we couldn't find in our surveys, but they claim it was there, and based on the distribution and the descriptions on the color, we assume that is one species had been extinct, locally extinct from this area. Um, they also mentioned that they attributed the disappearance of this bee when the Africanized honeybees arrived there in the 80s. So what we see here is that this, at least in this group of people, they have a very extensive knowledge about those 10 species out of the 200, so very reduced a group of bees for the entire diversity of bees there. They use a different kind of features to recognize it. They have at least 9 uses that include a consumption of honey, larvae, using the religious aspects. But I was wondering, what about other folk bee taxonomies? What other groups in other regions? So these, in 2019, right before the pandemic, I had the opportunity to join an expedition to the northern part of Colombia, so southern and closer to the tropics. And this is in the peninsula of La Guajira, which is close to Venezuela. This is mostly dry forest, and here it is inhabited by a group of people named the Waju people. And in this area, we know that there is about 100 species of native bees, including the honeybees. So we did the same methodology, to understand how they are understanding and classifying bees, and the results are very similar. So basically, they have one group of bees that are make honey, and they include the honeybees there, and one group of bees that are stinging, Hymenoptera, stinging um, uh, bugs. And here we include, well, they include the honeybees, they include carpenter bees, and even solitary and social wasps. So they are only recognizing 3 out of those 100 species that we estimate that are in the area. So again, very similar to that. And when we look in the literature for other group of people that are also cohabiting with another group of bees in different parts of the world. This is in India, and this is a research that it was published about the same time. They recognize mostly honeybees and stingless bees. So these stingless bees are also social bees that make honey. And what is interesting is that they have a very good knowledge about the type of flowers that they visit, the taste of the honey, but they don't know much about the other bees that are only solitary bees that are in the area. So what about in other regions? So this lack of limited knowledge of bees just restricted to the people living in these areas? And this is something that I was even more surprised when I learned, and this is a recent research, that when they were asking people, and this is in the US, about, I think they interview about 1,500 people. Most people couldn't recognize or distinguish a bee from a no-bee insect. And this is for the public, right? However, most of them were able to recognize honeybees and bumblebees, right? Um, Even more interesting is this case in this island. You may have heard of that. This is in the North Aegean. It's called Lesbos, and just on the upper left, you see the number of species of bees in the entire world. So the darker the area, the more diverse, or the more species you might find in this area. So we are right in the middle of a hotspot for bee diversity. And this island, which is about the 4% of the size of Switzerland, has about the same number of species, all concentrated that in that tiny area. So I have been going to this island for several years now, every summer, and I just wonder, what do the people know about the local bees? Well, you will be surprised that they basically know about the same thing that have been found in over and over. So they recognize the holy bee that they call Melissa, extensive knowledge of that species there. Bambura, which are just the bumblebees and, and carpenter bees, so the larger bees, and then Sphycas, which basically includes here wasps, both solitary and social, and the rest of bees. So it is very surprising that in an area that is very, very rich in species, we're only recognizing a few species of bees. So why is that? And I have three hypotheses, and one of them is that we are dealing with a high number of species here for insects, right? Another one is that the small body size makes them invisible, and that's what's happening. Like even now, most pollinators are invisible for all of us, right? We can only see those that are fuzzy and big, or they have large colonies, for instance. And we tend to focus on those that are either beneficial, in the case of those that are making honey, harmful, those that sting, or that are very common locally, right? So those are the explanation that I have for this pattern that I have seen in different groups across the Americas, and also now in this area that is highly diverse for bees, but the people don't know much about it. So what are the implications for this? And this is something that it will be interesting to discuss in today. One is that local knowledge might not be equal, and it's not equal across all groups and across all regions, right? That fall taxonomies, at least for bees, don't go hand in hand. And this is something that I've been looking through other insects. And it seems that this is the pattern can be applied for other insects as well. So for instance, for ants and wasps, they only know a few common wasps, a few ants that are very common. Usually they're related to their crops, or if they're living next to them, they recognize it. But the rest, the great majority of them, basically are just ignored. Right? This has huge implication for conservation. How can we conserve something that we don't even know? Local people don't even know that. We sometimes as scientists don't even recognize the entire diversity of those organisms. And the last one is what impacts this information has on the decolonization practices in entomological collections, right? However, I think I see something important here is that scientific knowledge may inform local knowledge. And in the paper that I mentioned here in India, right, where they only recognize honeybees and a few stingless bees, they did something very interesting that shows that how scientific knowledge and scientific taxonomy can inform and maybe in the future recognize or improve this local knowledge, in which they, here in the figure in the bottom, they measure the people's ability to recognize different kinds of bees. Then they give them some training, they show them pictures, they show them the nests of these bees, they talk about it, and then test them again. And they improve about twice the number or the ability for them to recognize that. So this is a way that, in my opinion, scientific knowledge, scientific taxonomy can contribute to this fall taxonomy to improve their concepts or to expand their concepts in these groups that are important. And there is some light, I think, in this process of understanding and naming nature. So I think with this, I hope I didn't go over the time, but I just wanted to thank you for being here today, and I will be happy to answer any questions, or we can wait until at the end to discuss some of these aspects. Thank you.